What up, boys? It's Undad again, back with another Shadowlands beta YouTube video. This video is going to be less about content that exists on the beta and more about a question I've been getting a lot, which is, what is the meta for Shadowlands? What is the Season 1 meta? What classes are going to be meta? Blah, 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 blah. And obviously it's too early to truly know, so I wanted to make a video talking about like how you go about identifying what the meta is, and being like ahead of it and knowing what to play, and just doing like what I would assume most of the other, if not all the other top end players are doing, whether it's subconsciously or not. Like little things they're thinking about when they're seeing classes and they're seeing dungeons and they're trying to figure out what's going to be good. So I'm going to break it down into some sections, some things that I think are important for being a valuable class in keys, or a spec in keys, in like order of how important they are, and then from there that's how like I determine what it is I think I'm going to play. So let's make some fucking big font, bro. Here we go. So the first thing is survivability. If you can't live, you can't be there. So that's just... This all ends up depending on like how the bosses and dungeons play out. Whether you're survival enough is things like cheat deaths are useful, immunities, just consistent DR. Think about something like Havoc Demon Hunter right there. Like a lot of the reason that Havoc Demon Hunter has been meta for so long in BFA is just because consistent magic DR and blur is insane. Outranging mechanics can push ranged into a favorable place. This happened for a lot of Legion. All of the dangerous mechanics, if there is nobody within 30 yards, would just cast on the tank, and the tank could live them. So you could just play Boomy Warlock and never get hit by anything, or even Hunter, and blah blah blah. And then Windwalker monks had to do some cheesy shit to make sure that they could live to get their damage off, and then they just had to get out. What other things that help with survivability? I mean, obviously right now we have verse stacking, which is kind of a poor example because this will probably not be a thing. Obviously classes that benefit from verse DPS wise, like this is something that Outlaw Rogue has benefited from all of BFA and will likely benefit from in Shadowlands as well, is with, and the argument goes back and forth with crit or verse being the best stat for Outlaw, but I've always been a verse stacking Outlaw. I've always felt that when two stats are that close and one of them is verse, you always go verse, simply for the DR. So you end up like in most seasons walking into a dungeon and you just, here I am, I have 10% DR just standing here because I'm stacking verse. And it all comes down to the way the damage profiles play out in keys, and how often do you need a personal, how often is something like Feint valuable, how often is a cheat death valuable, how often is an immunity valuable, or how often is something like immunities or AMS from a DK, because it's not a true immunity, but if you can remove a debuff that way, things like that. And then we'll get to a later section that I'm going to touch back on survivability, but you should just be thinking about this. You should be taking the example currently of where Hunter does way more damage than Demon Hunter in current live keys, but in some push keys you have players opting to play their Demon Hunters instead of their Hunter, because this, if you cannot survive, key doesn't matter. Now, whether or not we get to a point where survivability is the limiting factor all depends on how the season scales out. It's most likely in Season 1. Season 1 is the most likely season that survivability is not the most important factor, and that our next section, which is Throughput, is. Because in Season 1 we haven't had enough compounding effects throughout the expansion, like as they introduce this system and this system, which usually is just like giant more multipliers on everybody's damage. But the damage taken of the keys still continues to scale in the same way. So usually you hit a wall where you don't have enough damage to time keys in season 1 compared to other seasons. The later seasons you typically favor we can't live this key anymore, and the earlier seasons favor we can't time this key just because we don't have the damage. So this has a lot to do with damage profiles, which is how often can you blast. Things like Fire Mage being a perfect example, that now that Fire Mages have enough mastery to reliably just play Minute Mage in every dungeon, the amount of damage and the speed of the dungeon just has skyrocketed as opposed to 2-minute Mage, because the damage profile is more favorable for how you realistically want to pull a dungeon, with not really down packs. You just pack into pack into pack into pack. It's also a reason that Outlaw, Rogue, and Havoc Demon Hunter have been so good. It's why Beast Mastery Hunter is so good currently. And I'm speaking about live here. I'll at the end I'll kind of recap and talk about my feelings about what the meta looks like it could end up being for Shadowlands. So anything I'm referencing here is referring to what is currently happening on live. So damage profiles, how often can you blast? Priority damage is often important. There's often packs where if you can remove a mob, you can then chain in. Think about Underrot and current keys. Having high priority damage on Bloodswarmers means you can kill a Bloodswarmer, chain a Bloodswarmer, kill a Bloodswarmer, chain a Bloodswarmer, and then you remove the Bloodswarmers, and now you have a lot of non-threatening mobs that you can just pull with the boss, which cuts a pull entirely. Because you were able to chain Bloodswarmers in and remove them, the mobs that were limiting you from pulling onto the boss, you can now pull onto the boss, and priority damage is what helps that through the form of Combust. Prey on the Weak from Rogue Between the Eyes is very impactful in that. Hunter doesn't really do much priority damage when they're blasting in those keys, but they do some for sure. The barb shots are going into something, and things like that. This also comes to healing bottlenecks is a form of throughput. So if we remember back to season 1, Galavast was a bottleneck. Galavast in Temple of Sethralis was what pushed a lot of people onto Druid. There were a lot of players playing Disc Priest and Mistweaver Monk back then. And Galavast was a big issue for Mistweaver Monk mana, and it's a big issue for just the way Disc Priest heals. Their tools aren't as good as Druid, who just hots everybody and throws a regrowth on whoever's soaking and chucks out wild growth randomly when people are low. So you'll be looking for bosses as we get into these dungeons that may have bottlenecks for some lower throughput healers that may do way more damage, but their actual healing throughput, at least their consistent throughput, god damn it, may not cut it quite enough to reliably heal those bosses. And then you just look at overall / single target DPS. Overall is obviously important. Single target DPS, I think it gets undervalued a lot. I think a lot of people look at overall and don't value boss damage as highly, even on a fort week. How impactful boss damage can be. Just being able to shave 10 seconds off a boss and get back into a trash pack is very valuable. So classes that are able to do very good AoE damage with the same, I don't know, conduit or legendary setup that they want to for single target DPS are going to be valued. That's something we saw definitely in BFA, was classes that had Azerite traits that amped their single target damage as well as their AoE, like there were BIS for both situations, performed the best over the entire expansion. If we look at Assassination Rogue in Season 1 with Shrouded Suffocation, also Subtlety Rogue in Season 1 with First Dance / Archive of the Titans, Frost Mage in Season 1, Archive of the Titans, Havoc Demon Hunter with, not yet, they didn't have Furious Gaze yet, and they weren't playing Eyes of Rage yet, but they were playing, what is the name of the Blade Dance one? I can't think of the name of the Blade Dance trait, but it was tuned to be Blade. That trait was the move for both AoE and single target. And then as Furious Gaze came out and they were able to stack that, that's obviously their BIS for single target and their BIS AoE trait, along with slotting in One Eyes of Rage being best single target and AoE. Warriors ended up with very strong single target and AoE Azerite traits in the form of Bastion and Deafening Crash. Mostly the form of Bastion being a little bit defensive, but also being very strong offensively with the mastery increase. And Deafening Crash increasing the uptime of their booming voice through Demoralizing Roar, increase the damage that they were able to do. And then what other meta? Oh, and then we have Hunters currently. Hunters currently play a full single target Azerite setup, except for one trait for AoE, which is also that's also how Outlaw Rogue plays. They play 5 of their best 5 single target traits, and then 1 AoE trait to facilitate their big damage through wits and rapid reload for both of those specs. So things like that. Now it obviously won't be Azerite traits, but we will be looking at conduits and legendaries to fill the same void. So a class that has a really good legendary that affects them in single target and AoE. Master Assassin. Sorry, yeah, Matt. Yeah. Obviously, it has potential to be very strong in a Mythic Plus environment because they don't have to sacrifice damage in one place to gain damage in another. And then last, well, almost last, is just utility. And this is, I mean this in the form of interrupts, stuns, B-res, off healing, disorients, buffs and debuffs. Things like that. Slows, roots, kite enablers, out of combat CC, which could be helpful for collecting packs and making the packs what you want them to be, like picking and choosing what mobs. So this is where you need to bring enough melee to handle all the kicks that you need, right? Which right now so far, well, I'll talk about that later. Whatever you're pulling, whatever the pull patterns end up being, you have to have enough kicks to handle it. Or in the case of things that can be interrupted with stuns or disorients or just other stops, you have to have enough. So whatever that be, things like Dragon's Breath, in-cap Roar that Druids will now have access to, Nox, Gouge, stuns, whatever, grips, blinds, all these things you have to have enough to handle what you're doing. And that kind of goes hand in hand with survivability, because there may be a certain point where you can let kicks go off because you have enough survivability. So these kind of go bang bang. You kind of, these bounce off of each other. B-res, we'll see. I'm assuming engineering B-res is coming back. I have not leveled engineering yet. We are doing Torghast progression is really all there is to do on beta right now, so we're slogging through that right now. We'll get to professions, although I guess that is a lie. I leveled enchanting, it took like 5 seconds. But B-res can be extremely valuable. And if the B-res is the tank, 2 B-reses can be extremely valuable. That's something we saw in Season 1 as well. That just the tank B-res wasn't always enough, because like, what if the tank dies? You're just fucked. That sucks. But I think we'll have NG B-res again. We'll see. Off healing. This is something that's brought obviously from Druids. Druids have a new way to bring even more if they take Heart of the Wild and Resto Affinity, which also gives them access to Vortex. DPS Druids. So DPS Druids should just through throwing out wild growths and tough healing spots. Can help with survivability and throughput. These all like tie in together. Hellstones from Warlocks. Things like Vampiric Embrace from Shadow Priests. Just off healing in general from Shaman. Stuff like that. We think about buffs and debuffs. This, I'm actually going to include Bloodlust in this, but let's talk about buffs, debuffs first. Obviously, you have Fort buff. You have Intellect buff. You have Battle Shout. These have all been, I think, toned down, so they're not as impactful this expansion. I actually have not looked into that as much as I should have. These all play a factor, along with debuffs coming from Chaos Brand and Mystic Touch with magic and physical damage taken debuff from Monk and Demon Hunter. Things you take into account. That raises, if you have a full physical comp and you're trying to figure out who your third DPS is, maybe Windwalker doesn't do as much damage as the next guy, but they buff the rest of your group by 5%. Maybe that's enough. And the unique utility you get from Windwalker in the form of out of combat CC with Paralysis. You have Slow's Roots Kite Enabler with Disable and Ring of Peace. You have an AoE stun. Windwalker brings a lot of utility. Oh, and also Dispels. Dispels become increasingly important. So each healer has a weak spot. Some healers have more than one weak spot in something that they can't dispel. Like Paladins and Monks cannot dispel curses. Druids cannot dispel disease. Priests cannot dispel curses or poison. And Shaman cannot dispel disease or poison. That's a big thing, like when people ask about Resto Shaman, that I think a lot of people overlook is, like, a lot of the reason... Well, obviously, Resto Shaman's throughput is just in a weird spot, and their healing profile's not the best for keys, but they can't dispel poison or disease. It's just curse and magic. And the reason that Shaman and Priest are like that is because they have an offensive purge, is how, I guess, Blizzard has balanced it. Because they have the offensive dispel, they get one less on their defensive dispel. So that's historically a reason why you don't see Shaman healers. Obviously not the reason, but is a reason. And this is a void you can fill with a DPS as well. So say you bring something like a Paladin, you can fill that void with a Hearse to spell DPS, whether that be a Shaman, Druid, or Mage. You choose, but if you feel like you need it, that's how you can fill your comp out. These all contribute to like what ends up being the most static comp, because you want to be playing with the same 5 people, right? If you're pushing high keys, you want to be playing with the same 5 people, so you want to have the most consistent array of classes you can. I mentioned this. Actually, we'll talk about unique things, which can be impactful as well. So unique things, we're talking about stuff like Shroud. We're talking about something like Feign Death skips, Meld skips through the Night Fae Covenant. We'll put Bloodlust in here. Bloodlust can be a unique thing that it is increasingly valuable. What else can we have? Things like Bop or Spell Bop can be taken into consideration as like a pretty unique immunity you're able to give a friend. Priest Simp build is a new thing. So I don't think this will be very impactful in dungeons, but we'll see. Also, Priest Shroud slash actually Mind Soothe is actually super powerful right now for Priest. There's a lot of skips you could do with just Mind Soothe and not actually a Shroud. But these are all things you take into account as you're looking at the dungeons. Like, you want to see how impactful all these things are. So it starts at survivability. Well, first it actually starts at unique things. If there's a unique thing that you just like need, or else the dungeon is not timeable, you start here. And then you bring classes after that that can live, that have proper damage profiles, priority damage, can get through the healing bottlenecks, whether it's through helping their healer or being the healer. And then you have to fill out your utility from there. You have a combination of all this stuff has to exist for you to be able to push the highest keys. Now, in middle tier keys, I want to talk about this too, because this gets repeated, I think, by a lot of streamers, influencers, and people that play at a high level constantly, but for some reason it doesn't sink in. That at medium tier keys and at just like weekly keys, whether it be 15s, in the state of like the current game would be like 15s to 20, 21, 22, you can make your own comp. Whatever the players are doing at the highest keys, they're obviously doing for a reason, but the gains are a lot of 1% gains added together. And those players are utilizing all those little 1% gains to the maximum of their ability to push these highest keys. Whereas if you're just doing 15s, or you're just, and I don't mean to say like just doing 15s, like you little fucking weebs down there in the 15 land, like 15 keys are hella fun. But if that's your jam, you can play whatever you want. You just have to be aware of where your shortcomings here are so that you can play around it. Like where your comp lacks some survivability. So what do you have to do? Maybe you have to pull a different pack. Instead of just copying the route from a 29 freehold that's done with a very specific comp, or a 29 Waycrest that's done with a very specific comp, you build your route around what you have. Like maybe you don't have a shroud. Maybe like you don't bring rogue, and that's fine. So you have to pull some different shit. You have to pull a little bit smaller in this area because you don't have enough interrupts. Or maybe a certain boss you have to lust instead of something else because of the healing bottleneck. Things like that. Speaking of lust, I didn't mention, drums are nerfed. This is actually really important that drums are super nerfed in Shadowlands. They are 15% now instead of the 25% they are in BFA. And Bloodlust is 30% haste. So Bloodlust class is going to be increasingly important, I think, for timing the highest keys. Again, for middle tier keys, I don't think it'll make that much of a difference, but getting the biggest impact Bloodlust will be important at the highest end. So, with all that said, the little side rant about, like, you don't have to follow the meta, and you can invite people. As long as you understand what other classes do, like, just invite them. You don't have to play a meta comp in plus 15 keys. You really do not. In fact, there are classes like Rep Paladin, for example, that just, like, shit on low-level keys. So much harder than something like a Fire Mage. Like, miss me with that, dude. Give me a Rep Paladin instead of Fire Mage if I'm doing 15s. Fire Mage ass in 15s. And then it's the best spec in the game in higher level keys, So anyways, with all this said, what do I think is going to happen? So, we'll start with tanks. Right now, I think it's pretty clear that Blood Decay is the front runner for the most powerful Mythic Plus tank. All the tiny little buffs they've gotten have made them quite strong. On top of getting a Covenant ability that is just extremely versatile, they have a Covenant ability that is 15% DR and 15% strength basically all the time to everything in your D&D. And they have a lot of control. I think Blood Decay always has the most utility of any tank. Like, they're the... maybe not the most. Brewmaster might have more. But they have very visceral and very impactful utility. And you can make a lot of very cool pulls work just with Mass Grip. Like, Mass Grip enables so much. And they can enable some classes that really benefit from stacked packs. Like, fully hard stacked packs and not spread out stuff. Windwalker comes to mind with that. That they're at an advantage. Is what is going to be the bottleneck for Blood Decays is if you get to the highest keys and they can stay alive. Because Blood Decay is insane until it gets one shot. And eventually with infinite scaling, it gets one shot. And it starts to get one shot consistently. And it doesn't have time to react to get that Death Strike off to keep it alive. So if we don't hit the wall of BDK getting one shot, if we have enough cooldowns now, given that we have Lichborn and Vamp Blood on a very short cooldown on Vamp Blood, top of Rune Weapon, which has a conduit that will buff your HP after Rune Weapon, and your Rune Generation. So Rune Weapon effectively has like a longer cover time, I guess, on how impactful Rune Weapon is going to be. We'll see how that plays out. Tanks in the background waiting to get in, that will be like just outside the meta, I think, are Prop Paladin and Vengeance Demon Hunter. I think these two are going to be slightly squishier than DK, actually. So the odds of them surpassing DK at the highest keys is pretty low, but in medium tier keys and maybe at the start of the expansion, they could be okay. Prop Paladin does a fuckload of damage and still has some issues with just like gaps in their mitigation, but what are you going to do? The class is pretty good. Vengeance Demon Hunter is the same. We'll see. There's a unique tank legendary that all the tanks can get. It's an absorb, and it's basically like a damage reflect legendary. And we'll see how hard that's able to carry all tank classes into relevance. I think there's an outside chance that Brewmaster is pretty decent just because of the way Brewmaster's damage taken profile exists. We will see. There were nerfs to Brewmaster yesterday. I haven't played with or talked to any Brewmaster since then, so I don't know what the impact of them are. But maybe it owned them and they're fucked. So for right now, we're thinking Blood DK for tank. Now, we'll talk about DPS before we get into healer. We'll talk about two of the DPS slots. I think the way that Shadowlands dungeons work, currently you're going to want to bring a rogue to every key. I think that I think this just needs to stop being perceived as a problem for the highest keys, and just like that's just what rogue does. I don't think it's really a bad thing that if you want to get into keys and you play melee, rolling rogue is a safe way to get invited as a utility slot. Maybe that's because I'm a rogue, but keep in mind, before BFA, I was not a rogue player. I swapped to rogue specifically because I anticipated how strong rogue was going to be in Mythic Plus and BFA, and I wanted to play a valuable class. So, like, obviously now I'm very attached to the class, and I'm, like, intimately comfortable with all three specs and how they function in Mythic Plus and how to get the most out of them and whatever, but that wasn't always the case. So I know that's not what people want to hear a lot of the time, is that you might want to swap to a different class to play in Mythic Plus, but if you want to play at the highest level, sometimes there's a situation. Again, in 15s, it's very easy to make routes that don't involve Shroud, that you'll still time keys in, especially with the use of new things like Night Fae Meld, and we'll see how the engineering stealth works. I guess it's been data mined, or it's been found that there's an engineering belt that is a 2-minute cooldown stealth for any engineer. My worry is there's a lot of kind of relatively long skips. And my worry also is that not every healer on the planet is going to want to be Night Fae. But we'll talk about that when we talk about healers. So with that, and the rogue has good throughput as well. Like Outlaw Rogue has insane throughput right now. I think Subtlety has a place in some dungeons, and I think Assassination will get some help. Assassination's it's like middle of the road decent right now. So we'll be fine here as well. And obviously utility rogue is just like fucking insane. They also bring a Soothe now, which is another unique utility with Shiv. So you have interrupts, you have stuns, you have blinds, disorients, you have stealth for saps, mid-combat vanishes to resap stuff or get cheap shots off, on top of Outlaw having Gouge for an additional route, on top of Crippling Poison, on top of Numbing Poison, which is new. Numbing Poison, this is coat your weapons with a non-lethal poison. Each strike has a 50% chance of poisoning the enemy, clouding their mind and slowing their attack and casting speed by 15% for 10 seconds. The potential utility of that is insane. Now, Outlaw and Subtlety will have trouble spreading this in AoE because it's only their strikes, which is, I think, melee attacks is all that counts from what I've seen. And Assassination can apply that in AoE, which is effectively all melee damage to your tank reduced by 15%. So with all those things, and then you get to Shroud, and it's just like, bro, Rogue is going to be good. Worth noting in the Shroud department is that Priest has Mind Soothe back, which reduces the radius at which mobs detect you, and it's actually extremely powerful. You can walk very close to mobs that are Mind Soothed, and they won't aggro. So that's worth keeping in mind if you do happen to have a group that doesn't play with Rogue, but you have a Priest friend, and you want to play with Priest. We'll get to Priest in a little bit, because I do think Priest has a potential to break into the meta. Make sure you're utilizing this, because I think it's going to be sick. Now, so far we have BDK, and again, these are just predictions. This is ideal comp if the game went live tomorrow. Next spot. Let's think about Bloodlust. Are we bringing a Resto Shaman? No. Okay. What DPS is bringing our Bloodlust? Because it's got to be... It's got to be there if you're doing the highest keys. At mid-tier keys, it's okay. But at the highest keys, I think you need real Bloodlust. So now you have options. You have Hunter, you have Shaman, you have Mage. This straight up comes down to which one is going to do the most damage. Which one's doing the most damage? Brings the best utility? Whatever. They bring pretty similar utilities. Hunter has a Soothe. The others don't. All three have offensive purges. Shaman and Mage both have Curse Dispel. Shaman has the ability to play ranged. Could be melee. If it's melee, it brings Wind Fury Totem now. We'll see what the impact of that is from enhancement. Hunter currently is looking like Marksman is the move, so not playing survival. Binding Shot is uniquely powerful. Slows from Frost Mage are extremely powerful. Things like Frost Nova and Sheep are very powerful, but you also have Hex and Freezing Trap to go with that. So there's a lot of overlap on these 3 classes. And because of that, I think it just comes down to straight up which one does the most damage. Right now, that would be Marksman Hunter, but we'll see what tuning comes out. I think you'll bring one of those 3 classes. I think their utilities are similar enough. Maybe there's a world where the off-healing of Shaman is nuts. It is pretty good. Their ability to single target off heal just through Healing Surge is pretty powerful. Along with, they have Healing Stream Totem back on a 30-second cooldown. You can find empty globals, especially as enhancement. You can find a global here and there just to drop a Healing Stream without really being a DPS loss at all. So keep that in mind. Right now it's Hunter for sure. Marksman Hunter is maybe the highest DPS spec in the game in keys across all different pull sizes. Like a lot of their shit is uncapped. Some of them are capped, but a lot of their stuff is uncapped. They're legendary in particular. They do a lot of damage. Single target, AoE, small cleave. Their damage profile, which we talked about earlier, is just very good. They have good priority damage. Everything about them is strong. So, I want to skip the next DPS for a second and talk about the healer. So healer's going to come down to how much healing do you need, making sure you can heal everything, and then doing the most damage. So right now, I think you default to Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin is doing more damage than any other healer. And then if you ever hit a healing bottleneck where the HPAL cannot heal because of the way that the fight is set up, like you can't get the heals in, you have 2 options. 1, you change your healer. 2, you fit the last slot in of your DPS with some sick off healing or unique utility that makes it so the HPAL can get away with playing. So secondary choices for healer, I think right now would be Monk, Druid. Honestly, just for the dispels. I think Poison Dispel and Disease Dispel are going to be pretty important. Disc Priest does have potential though. Like I said, things like Mind Soothe and the Disease Dispel seems to be a little bit more important than the Poison Dispel, which is the opposite of what BFA was. Poison Dispel was much more important than Disease was. But we'll see as we get into all the dungeons. Again, we've only really done 3 dungeons on Mythic Plus. I'm not really counting Plaguefall because I don't think Plaguefall is complete. They've been changing shit in there constantly. We'll see how that plays out, but I think you default Pala, and then you end up in a situation maybe where you have to swap to Druid. We'll see what the output of Mistweaver is for HPS. We'll see what the output of Priest is, but you have options there, and you also have options with your 3rd DPS slot, which right now, the way it plays out, so let's assume we play DK Pala and then Hunter Rogue. Your 3rd DPS slot just fits what you need. Whatever you need in the group across the majority of dungeons, you slot in there. Obviously, you want something that does the most damage possible. If you don't need anything, you just take the highest damage, which currently right now looks like Destruction Warlock is what you would take as your 3rd DPS. And most dungeons look like 2 melee interrupts is going to be enough. 2 melee and 2 ranged interrupts should be fine. Even 2 melee, 1 ranged, and a beam or a Shadow Priest interrupt should be fine. So Destruction Warlock is an option there. If you decide you need off healing, you can bring Boomy. They bring trees. Blood DK actually loves trees because Blood DK is like very small cooldown dependent. They pop a small cooldown, they're alive. A small cooldown, they're alive. A small cooldown, they're alive. And trees are a form of a small cooldown that effectively give them a small cooldown after the trees as well because they're just able to build up resources. And when a DK has resources, they can't die. So trees are not uniquely powerful. They're very good for every tank, but trees are very good for DK. They also bring a B-Res. They can bring slows and roots in the form of Vortex and then just root or mass root. They have a Dispel. They cover a Curse Dispel because this group does not have a Curse Dispel. And then they also have unique things like Soothe, which I guess is covered by the other 2 now. Never mind. Hunter and Rogue just have everything. And their damage seems very good. They're an uncapped AoE spec, so you can pull as big as you want. Starfall hits everything. Multi-dots all hit everything. And their single target damage is very good. So you can look at something like Boomy. Obviously, Warlock brings in the form of off healing that Warlock brings is Hellstones, which having infinite Hellstones in dungeon I think is a little underrated. It's really sick. For anybody that's played keys during a Warlock meta, you will know how sick it is to have Hellstone every time you want to have Hellstone. They also bring a B-Res, which is pretty nice. They're a range class, so the ability to just outrange stuff, very good. Warlock comes to mind there. Shadow Priest with the new rework, we'll have to see how it goes. I think it has a lot of potential. Also comes to mind, you have things like Mind Soothe from Shadow Priest. You get off healing in the form of Vampiric Embrace. You get a new buff. You get Fort buff, real Fort buff. And just good uncapped AoE damage. And then you have things like Unholy Decay that are just doing a lot of damage right now. But what you could do is you could take every class in the game and you can find a way that it's useful in this 3rd DPS slot. And you just have to try to solve for what's going to be most useful for your group and the dungeons that you're doing. So I do think that it's just going to be Rogue Hunter X for the majority of Season 1 if things don't change. Now, things that could change this is obviously some utility being taken away, big nerfs to damage. Keep an eye out for legendaries and conduits as well. I think a lot of people are going to overlook the defensive conduits that classes take, and I think they're going to end up being supremely impactful on which classes are played at the highest keys. Like for example, Rogue is getting a conduit that effectively is going to make Crimson Vial cost 0 energy, which is our self heal, so you can just hit it on cooldown. Need very little healing attention, as well as Feint costing 15 energy, which opens up the option to just play Elusiveness and just hit Feint on cooldown, right? Like you just play Elusiveness, hit Feint on cooldown, and now everything that hits you is going to have a 30% DR or a 35% DR if it's an AoE, or 40% DR if it's an AoE ability. So there's a lot of little things like that. I don't know the specifics on defensive conduits for other classes because I just haven't invested the time into it yet. But be thinking about that. If you play DPS, I think the safest bet is just play Rogue. If you play Healer, the safest bet is always going to be Druid, even though I think Paladin is better right now. I think Druid's a very safe pick just because of all the utility that they bring. And if you play Tank, I would roll up a DK and start learning Blood. But I'm curious what you guys think, like how you guys go about figuring out what you bring to keys, and also stories about bringing off meta stuff and having a lot of success. I'm curious about that too. So please leave comments below if you have anything to say to that, anything you disagree with this as well, that you've had like experiences where you haven't cared about some of these things or something else was more important for when you were building your Mythic Plus comp. Please let me know. That'd be awesome. If you like the video, please hit me with a like. And if you want to see more stuff, I'm trying to do daily videos for all of beta until I run out of shit to talk about or I just pass out and I can't do it anymore. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot. Helps me notify you when the videos are going live and you can check out the new stuff. So thanks again, boys. Peace.